in this brief presentation, I just wanted to touch on a few tips about the pasture management. So with that, let's see. Okay. So when we're talking about the pasture management, it's a whole lot of things included in the pasture management. And of course, I'm not going to talk about all of these components, but so as we go from the base to the top, the importance of the components becomes limited. So the most important thing to the pasture management is soil fertility in terms of liming, fertilization, and that sort of things. But that is not the subject of this brief presentation. But that is very, very important because, as you probably know, there are a lot of farmers that they don't really add lime or fertilization to their hay crops or pastures. Today, I'm just going to give you a few tips about the grazing management. So again, I'm not going to touch about the soil and soil fertility and soil testing and that sort of things, which are the major and the major thing to the pasture management. So the pasture, if it's done right, is the best thing that may happen to animals, and environment, and human beings. This is a picture that shows it all. The grasses are feeding the animals. Animals are happy, and they sequester carbon. They bring in carbon from the atmosphere. But what we don't see is that those grasses are feeding the soil, and the soil, which is full of life, really require the materials and the compounds that are released by the living roots. And so those pastures not only feed the animals above the ground, but they also feed the living organisms in the soil. But it could be the worst enemy. As you can see, the overgrazed situations, whether it's a horse farm or the cow, that is probably one of the major enemies to the environment. And this algae bloom is just one of them, okay? So the question is how overgrazing happens. It happens because sometimes we forget that the pasture plants are not growing at the same rate throughout the year. Sometimes they are growing very, very rapidly, and they may reach 100% of their growth. But however, during the month of summers, like August, July, August, we have summer slump, and also we have some kind of shortfall during the fall. The problem is, a lot of people, including horse owners and others, they consider the pastures and they treat them, uniformly. They don't care about if it's a summer or if it's a fall or it's a spring. So that is the beginning of harming the pastures. So as long as we have the high growth rate of the pastures, we're good to go. However, if we keep the same number of animals for the same period of time grazing, then probably we are going to be in trouble. One of the things that unfortunately a lot of farmers don't pay attention is that the growth of the pastures, like any other crop, is like a sigmoid, is like a S shape, okay? It starts with a very slow growth rate, okay, until the plant reaches around 3 to 4 inches. And then after that, the plant enters a fast growth stage, okay? Now, if we cut the plant at this stage, like 1.5, 1 inch, or even 2 inches, or we let the animals graze it down to about 1 or 2 inches, it takes time. It takes many days to pass this period and then enter into the fast growth. Okay, they may look at the short-term benefit, if you call it benefit, to graze 1 or 2 extra inches, but they have to, at the end of the day, they have to pay for it. So I want to show you a demonstration, which is, I think, it's a very eye-opening. This research was done by University of Kentucky Extension. And as you can see, this is, so what they did, they cut the grasses at two heights. Excuse me, is somebody's talking?
Somebody's talking.
Okay, yes, somebody's, yeah. So please mute yourself. So anyways, so yeah, as you can see, the one pot was cut at 1 inches and the other one at 3.5 inches. And this is how it happens. So after the 3 days, the one that was cut at 3.5 started to regrow, whereas the one that in 1 inch is still behind the growth. And because it takes several days to pass that very slow rate of the growth stage. So again, day 4, day 5, and day 6. So now after a week, as you can see, the one that was cut in 3.5 inches, now they are several inches, whereas the one that was cut at 1 inches is just started to grow. And that is, that you can imply this exactly the same thing to the field condition, okay? So yes, if we cut it like a couple of inches lower, that means we have more grasses, but we have to pay a significant price at the end of the day. So that is, again, another reason for overgrazing. So there are a few fundamental tips about the grazing. One of them is that we have to leave enough residues to, like I said, roughly about 4 inches. I mean, the 5 would be better, but at least 4 inches for the supporting the fast regrowth. Okay, that is one. And the other thing and if you look at this picture again, that's eye-opening. If you will, if this, the first two are the grasses that have been grazed around 3-4 inches, and the other two are grazed at lower height. And you can see the volume of the roots. That shows that these two are much, much healthier. And when we say healthier, that translates into tolerant to the drought condition, because now this volume of the roots can tap into the deeper moisture in the soil, whereas these two are very, very sensitive to the drought. And if, for instance, if we don't have a rain for a month or so, these will die. And once they die, you see those bare soils. Okay, and so that is a major tip about the grazing. The other is that we need to leave. We need to give the plants a break. We need to, after the grazing, we need to give plants adequate time. This is what we call the resting period or recovery period. The other thing is that when it comes to the grazing, there is a simple calculation that we need to do in order to see how much really we have. What is the inventory per field, per paddock, or whatever section that we have? On average, this is very average, we should expect something like 250 pounds of dry matter per inch per acre. So if we have like 10 inches of forage, 10 times 250, that translates into the 250 pounds. But you're not going to harvest the whole thing, right? So if you have 10 inches, you have to leave 4. Now you have only 6 inches. So 6 times 250, this is how much we have. And then we need to select the number of animals based on what we have, okay? And therefore, we need to look at the demand of the animals. Each animal demands differently. For instance, the horses require roughly about 3% of their body weight. So if a horse is 1,000, then they need about 30 pounds per acre. The 30 pounds dry matter per day. Okay, so that shows how that paddock or that field can accommodate the number of animals that we have. Sheep is 4%, cows are 3%, and so forth. So we need to look at the demand and in the inventory. So the resting period is another important thing. Unfortunately, it's not the same for all the months. It changes. For instance, the plant requires much shorter recovery during the month of April and May. Whereas when you look at the September, this time of the year, it requires 36 days or so. So based on, and these are the average for the New England. So we have to make sure that we are going to give enough resting period based on the month of the grazing to the plants in order to have a healthy pastures. So I'm suggesting a very simple rotational grazing. So if it doesn't have to be, your field doesn't have to be circle, of course, it could be rectangle, could be whatever. So I partitioned the field into 6 roughly the same size paddocks, and therefore the animals can start grazing. This is house number 1. And so after, based on the demand and based on the animals, after 6 days, we move them here and then there and there. So after 30 days, we go back. Okay, so that means this one that was grazed first had 30 days recovery. Now, you may say, well, how do you know? Maybe we don't need 30. Maybe we need only 15 days. Or on the other side, maybe we need more than 30 days. Well, that's why we call it simple, right? So this is not really intensive rotational grazing. This is just a simple. And this is a good beginning. That's a good start for those that never practice rotational grazing. And then as they go, they can fine tune it. And therefore, they have a much better sophisticated rotational grazing. So the take-home message of what I said is the overgrazing is, and as you can see, this is in Hadley. And as you can see, the beautiful houses around there, and these guys are really polluting the environment. So the take-home message from this brief presentation is the overgrazing is the sin of the sins, is the first enemy of the environment, not only the environment, but also to the economics of the farm, productivity. And so with that, so I just try to give a very brief, a few important tips, knowing that some of you guys may have some questions.
Increasing engagement with farmers in rotational grazing. A lot of farmers think it's extra work.
I do agree. It requires extra work, but maybe it's a little bit problematic at the very beginning, but once they fine tune the grazing period and that sort of thing, it's not going to be as bad as they think. And it pays off. Honestly, it pays off. They get way more forage from the pasture compared with the non-rotational. It comes with all kinds of benefits, environmental benefits, uniform depositing manure, soil health, all of those things. So at the end of the day, it really pays off, and some extra. And remember that we don't have to rotate them every day. The farmer can choose. There is a calculation, of course. I didn't talk about that calculation today, but there is a calculation, and the farmer can decide if he or she wants to rotate the animals every day or every 2 days, or every 3 days, or every 4 days. For lactating animals, we usually recommend 1 or 2 days, not more than 2 days. But for other animals, you can choose 4 days, 5 days, as long as you have enough land for the number of animals. So it's not like every day, rotating every day. And changing the fence, the temporary fence, to move the animals from one section to another section roughly takes about 10 to 15 minutes. So I think it's really worth it to spend 10, 15 minutes to change the ropes or whatever fence we are using and get a lot of benefit out of it.
Okay, thank you. In the interest of moving along, we are starting to get a little behind schedule here.